For more than 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful systems on Earth. It ruled 3 continents, controlled the crossroads between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, commanded the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and the Red Sea. Its sultans called themselves caliphs, leaders of the Islamic world. Its armies once stood at the gates of Vienna. Its bureaucracy governed millions of Christians, Muslims, and Jews under a single imperial system. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire did not look fragile. It looked inevitable, and yet it collapsed, not in a sudden explosion, not in a single decisive war, but through a long, painful unraveling. So the question is not when the Ottoman Empire fell. The question is, why? Why did an empire that survived crusades, plagues, and civil wars fail in the modern age? How Islamic was the Ottoman Empire? Really? What do the Arabs think of the Ottoman Empire today? And was its collapse inevitable, or the result of specific decisions? This is not the story of a dramatic fall. This is the story of how one of history's greatest empires slowly lost the logic that once held it together. The Ottoman Empire is often remembered as an Islamic empire, and formally it was. The Sultan was also the Caliph, the symbolic leader of the Muslim world. But symbols are not systems. In reality, Ottoman power was never built on religion alone. It was built on administration. Law came before theology, order before ideology, stability before belief. So when people ask, how Islamic were the Ottoman Empire, the answer is not simple. Religion legitimized authority, but it did not organize daily life. Imperial law often overruled religious rulings. Taxes followed necessity, not doctrine. Appointments were based on loyalty, not piety. The empire did not demand uniform belief. It demanded compliance. Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived under separate legal systems, governing themselves while answering to the center. This was not tolerance, it was management. Difference was not erased, it was controlled. And that control was the source of Ottoman strength. For centuries, the empire survived, not because it was loved, but because it was predictable, and predictability is power. But every system has a cost. When authority relies too much on structure, it risks losing meaning. That weakness would appear later, when the world began to change faster than the empire could adapt. For centuries, the Ottoman system worked, not because it inspired loyalty, but because it enforced balance. The empire did not try to turn its subjects into Ottomans. It ruled over differences, not through unity. Arab provinces were not fully integrated. They were administered. Local elites governed in the name of the Sultan. Taxes flowed upward, order flowed downward. This arrangement was efficient, but it created distance. The center ruled, but it did not belong. Over time, this gap began to matter. Arab regions supplied soldiers, taxes, and legitimacy, but had little influence over imperial decisions. Istanbul decided, the provinces obeyed, and that obedience was practical, not emotional. This is why centuries later, the question still appears. What do the Arabs think of the Ottoman Empire? Because memory is shaped not by symbols, but by experience. For many, Ottoman rule was not oppression, but it was never partnership. The empire did not ask what its provinces wanted. It assumed stability was enough. As long as trade continued, as long as order was preserved, as long as rebellion was avoided, the system believed it was secure. But the modern world began demanding something different: participation, representation, identity. And the Ottoman system had no language for those ideas. It knew how to command. It knew how to manage, but it did not know how to adapt when control stopped being sufficient. And slowly, quietly, the foundations began to shift. By the 19th century, the problem was no longer hidden. The world around the Ottoman Empire was changing faster than ever before. Empires were no longer judged by how long they had existed, but by how quickly they could adapt. Europe modernized its armies, its economies, its institutions. The Ottomans understood this, and they tried to respond. They reformed the military, centralized taxation, reorganized administration, adopted European methods, uniforms, and laws. On the surface, it looked like progress, but these reforms changed tools, not logic. The empire modernized how it governed without redefining why it governed. Power still flowed from the center. Decisions were still imposed, not negotiated. Loyalty was still expected, not earned. The empire wanted modern efficiency without modern participation. It wanted reform without redistribution of authority. And that contradiction mattered, because modern systems do not survive on obedience alone. They require legitimacy. The Ottoman state tried to modernize an imperial structure in a world that was abandoning imperial logic. And instead of transforming itself, it reinforced the same hierarchy, now dressed in modern language. Reform became a way to delay collapse, not to prevent it. The system changed its appearance, but not its foundation. And that is often the most dangerous kind of reform, because it creates the illusion of adaptation while preserving the very constraints that made change necessary in the first place. By the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was no longer collapsing. It was stalling. The system still functioned, institutions still existed, authority was still formally intact, but its margin for error was gone. When the First World War began, neutrality was an option, but it was a dangerous one. Remaining outside the war meant isolation, pressure from stronger powers, gradual dismemberment without resistance. So the empire chose risk over irrelevance. Why did the Ottoman Empire enter World War I? Not out of ambition, not to expand, but to survive. The decision was rational. On paper, alliance promised protection, war promised leverage, victory promised time. But war does not test intentions, it tests systems. And this war revealed what decades of reform had hidden. The empire could mobilize soldiers, but not loyalty. It could issue orders, but not ensure obedience. Arab provinces hesitated. Local elites calculated. National movements accelerated. The center demanded sacrifice. The periphery asked a different question. For what? World War I did not destroy the Ottoman Empire. It exposed it. It showed that authority without identity cannot survive prolonged pressure. When the war turned against the empire, collapse was no longer sudden. It was simply unavoidable, because the system had reached the moment when survival required more than administration. It required belief, and belief was already gone. Empires survive as long as loyalty is automatic. The Ottoman Empire had relied on that assumption for centuries. Subjects obeyed because obedience was familiar. Elites complied because the system endured. The center ruled because no alternative seemed realistic. World War I changed that calculation. The empire demanded sacrifice, but could no longer guarantee protection, prosperity, or meaning. Loyalty stopped being inherited. It became conditional. Arab leaders began to negotiate instead of obey. Local elites hedged their bets. National identities offered something the empire could not, a future that belonged to them. The question was no longer whether the empire ruled. It was whether it was worth defending. And for many, the answer quietly became no. This is why the Ottoman collapse did not resemble a final stand. There was no unified resistance, no empire-wide mobilization to save the system. Because people do not fight for structures that no longer represent them. The empire still issued commands, but fewer people felt bound to answer. Authority remained legal, but legitimacy was gone. And once loyalty becomes optional, power becomes temporary. The Ottoman Empire did not lose its provinces all at once. It lost them in calculation, in waiting, in silence. each group choosing not to act when action was still possible. By the time the war ended, the empire still existed in name, but the social contract that sustained it had already dissolved. What remained was not collapse, it was absence. The Ottoman Empire did not die in a single decisive moment. It ended the way exhausted systems end, through paperwork, through signatures, through treaties, through administrative reality catching up with political fiction. When the war concluded, the empire was still visible on paper, but its capacity to act had collapsed. Its economy was drained, its army was broken, its provinces were no longer governed as one system. The state still spoke in the language of sovereignty, but it no longer controlled the conditions of sovereignty. External powers began to formalize what had already happened. Territories were reorganized, borders were redrawn, influence was distributed, and the empire's authority became something that could be negotiated away, not conquered, because conquest implies resistance, but resistance requires belief, and belief was already gone. This is why the Ottoman collapse felt strangely quiet. The empire had been weakened for so long that the final steps looked almost natural. Not like a fall, like a release. The center did not lose control overnight. It discovered, too late, that control had already left. And once power becomes something that exists only in documents, it is no longer power. It is a memory waiting to be replaced. The Ottoman Empire did not fall because it was defeated. It fell because it outlived its purpose. For centuries it provided order, then stability, then delay. But it never answered the final question every system must face. Why should this continue to exist? When faith stopped uniting, when structure stopped inspiring, when reform stopped transforming, the empire remained only as habit. And habits do not survive crisis. The Ottomans did not lose their empire in battle. They lost it by refusing to redefine it, by choosing preservation over reinvention, control over meaning, delay over decision. This is how empires really end. Not when they are conquered, but when they no longer justify their own power. Because the most dangerous moment for any system is not rebellion, it is irrelevance. And once power becomes irrelevant, collapse is no longer necessary. History simply moves on without it.